How can you become someone who isn't so easily triggered? If you find yourself walking around and you're just often bothered by things, you often feel like maybe you have an anxious or fearful response to things people say or things that happen to you, how can you solve that? This is a third part to my emotional charge model series. I originally had two parts in mind. We talked about this model of how things that happen to us during the day can build up an emotional charge that is really like sitting in our system and needs some kind of a release. And we talked about the three typical ways in which people find the release, find the emotional discharge, and why those are unhealthy and destructive. And then in the second part, we talked about the three ways in which you can discharge these emotions in a healthy way. And when I was done with that, I realized there's something else we need to talk about, because wouldn't it be nice to not get so charged up in the first place? And I'm sure you know some people who always seem to be on a hair trigger, who just easily get upset, get angry, get sad, just get worked up about stuff. It's almost like they're fragile. Whereas other people are not that easily shaken. Other people have a calm demeanor about them. And even if some stuff goes wrong, they don't have this constant need to, dump their emotions or get rid of this emotional charge. And wouldn't it be nice to be more like that? Well, as it happens, I have an experience with this, because it used to be that I was much more emotionally fragile. It used to be much easier for me to get triggered. And over the years, I've become so much calmer. And there are a few things I did that have made a big difference for me. So let's talk about how to become untriggerable. There are three things we're going to look at here. This is based on my own experience and also working with clients. These are the things that make people most emotionally fragile. And when you resolve these, it changes everything. The first one is the habit of making everything about yourself. And the root of that is insecurity. The more insecure you are, the more likely you are to interpret things in a negative light, the more likely you are to feel criticized or rejected or judged, and the more likely it is that you make things about you. As an example, imagine that you're at your workplace, you hand in a piece of work, and someone gives you feedback on it. Someone says, hey, here are some things you could improve about what you've done. And let's say that the way they give you the feedback is like a little bit, they're not being like super friendly and super flowery, and they're not smiling at you the whole time. There are different ways to interpret this situation. The more insecure you are, the more likely it is that this will be something that is triggering to you, that makes you feel anxious or afraid or maybe upset, that builds up this emotional charge that you then have to get rid of somehow. An insecure person's experience of this exchange is something like this. First of all, you're probably telling yourself, I should not have gotten any feedback. It's a failure on my part, and there's maybe something wrong with me that I didn't deliver a perfect piece of work right away. What you'd want is to deliver work that is so flawless that people look at it and go, this is amazing, absolutely no notes, right? So you think right away, there's already something wrong with me. I'm already not good enough, just based on the fact that I got any feedback at all. And secondly, the other person didn't seem to be in an amazing mood, and that must be my fault. They must be upset with me, they don't like me, and if it's my manager, they're probably daydreaming about firing me, and here they are having to give their crappy employee who they hate feedback on their crappy work. You have some story like that in your mind, and of course, that is highly emotionally triggering. That is upsetting. And you know what? There are other ways to interpret this that are also emotionally activating in an unpleasant way. What I've just described is an anxious, insecure person's perspective. Maybe your perspective is that the person who gave you feedback is an asshole. It's not their position to give you feedback in the first place. Why don't they judge and value your work more than that? And also, why are they coming to you with this bad mood and so on? Now, if you've watched part 2, you're recognizing two patterns here. The first one is the implosion, the collapse person. You're taking the blame on you. The second example I gave is more of an exploder, is more of like you're pointing fingers at the other person, but still it's charging you up emotionally, it's making you feel bad, and you're taking things personally, right? It's all about me. A secure person might interpret this situation completely differently. They might say, okay, I've done some work, someone's giving me feedback, that's completely normal, and in fact, it is super helpful. Someone giving me feedback on my work is helping me get better. And it can only be good for me to get better. How lucky I am to be surrounded by helpful colleagues like this. I can assume that it's completely normal to get feedback on my work, to get help from someone to improve my work. And I can assume that, okay, this person seems to have been in kind of a bad mood, but they're probably just having a bad day. Maybe they haven't had their second coffee yet. Maybe there's something else that went wrong in their life. Or maybe they're just this kind of person. Like some people are all bubbly and friendly all the time, and some people are kind of flat and neutral, and it has nothing to do with me. So this is how the exact same situation can have a completely different emotional tone and can either charge you up in negative ways or not charge you up at all, completely depending on whether you make it all about you and how insecure you are. So a solution to this is obviously to become more secure, but how do you become more secure? It's a bit of a can of worms that I don't think I can completely answer in just this video. But the most important aspect of this is what we'll get to next, and it is about the stories in your mind. Whenever something happens, an event happens out in the real world, and in response to that event, we make up stories. We tell ourselves stories in our minds about the event. I just gave you an example of one event and 3 possible stories that someone might tell themselves about that event in their mind. And the most important thing to notice about this is that the emotional charge does not come from the event. The emotional charge, whatever is upsetting about this, whatever causes anxiety and fear and anger, comes from the stories we tell ourselves. This is an extremely important but also counterintuitive idea. Whenever you are upset about something, when something triggers you, it is not whatever happened to you that is triggering you. You are triggering yourself via the stories you tell yourself in your mind about the event. I know this is a bit difficult to even, we don't want to admit this because it feels a little pathetic, right? It's like, oh, actually, I'm doing all of this to myself. We don't want that to be true. There's a great sense of righteousness when we believe that it's the external events, it's other people who are causing whatever we're going through. And admitting that, oh, actually, I'm doing that to myself in my mind is it's a bit embarrassing, right? It's like slightly embarrassing. But then, as one of my favorite mentors told me, being human is a little embarrassing. How triggerable you are is in such a large part affected by what stories you tell yourself about things that happen. So you can upgrade the stories, you can change the stories you tell yourself in your mind to make a huge difference to whether you get triggered all the time or not. The first step to doing this is to admit when you don't know. This is the first hurdle we have to get over, and it requires a little bit of humility. Look at the example I gave before. We love to think that we know. I love to think that I know that this colleague who gave me feedback doesn't like me. I know that he thinks my work isn't good enough. I know that my manager is thinking about firing me. But is that true? Do I actually know these things? Whenever we examine something like this more closely, we find that no, the truth is, I don't know. Once you're able to admit this, if you can see that there are the inner worlds of other people that are unknowable to us, and that really it's the stories we tell ourselves that are so upsetting, there are several tools you can explore to help rewrite your habits about how you tell stories to yourself. One of those would be introspective writing, and I'll link to more on that below. Another would be The Work by Byron Katie, which you could say is entirely about this. It's entirely about taking a closer look at what are the stories I'm telling myself, and then really looking at that story from all perspectives, going, hold on, is this actually true? What if the opposite were true? Who am I when I believe this is true? Who would I be if I believed the opposite? And so on. And you essentially look at the story in your mind from so many different perspectives until it falls apart, or it's easier to dissect, deconstruct, and start believing something else. And then another tool worth mentioning is authentic relating, where there are practices around voicing the stories in your mind, where you can really gain awareness by also making that distinction between here's what happened and here's the story in my mind about what happened. It can be a really, really incredible tool. What's even better is that you don't have to go through a long process of doing work with any of these tools and rewriting your mental habits and so on. Even though that helps, that's like the long-term solution. But the short-term solution is much simpler and much more available. It is simply starting to acknowledge that these are two different things. That The thing that happened, the external event, is not the same as the stories you tell yourself about that event. If you simply start paying attention to this, if you simply start seeing, okay, thing happens, and then I tell myself stories about that thing, and those stories are upsetting. If you simply start seeing this pattern in yourself, it already makes a huge difference. Which brings us to the third thing. This is a huge source of suffering that I see that people cause for themselves, and it has everything to do with control, especially when we try to control other people. Trying to control other people, trying to make other people conform to our expectations is one of the most emotionally agitating experiences possible. It is the thing that makes you most emotionally fragile. If you are going around feeling like you have to control whether other people are happy or sad or having a good time or a bad time, or whether they like you or not, or whether they respect you or not, all of that makes you extremely triggerable. For an illustrative example of that, I'm sure you can think of different people who have children, different family dynamics. Think about this. The unhappiest, most emotionally volatile, most triggerable parents you know are parents who have a very clear life plan for their children and want their children to conform to all of their expectations, and possibly want their children to make up for the mistakes that they feel like they made in their own lives. Those people are basically never happy, and they're very, very easily triggered. They're constantly walking around with lots of emotional charge. And then often the children, because they've been manipulated by their parents, or their parents have tried to manipulate them, tried to control them so much, their children are also often people who then feel like, I have to do things to make other people like me, to please other people, and so on. And again, those people are highly anxious, highly fearful, easily triggered, not having a good time. To invert that, if you become the kind of person who can let other people be themselves, if you can accept that other people will have their own emotional ups and downs, other people will have their hopes and dreams and heartbreaks and expectations and whatever else, other people are going to do people things, and they're allowed to do that, and mostly it has nothing to do with you. See how this ties back to the previous 2 points? If you can see the world like that, then other people's behavior generally doesn't upset you that much, and you're also not constantly changing your own behavior, trying to conform to other people's expectations. So, how do you become that kind of person? There are 3 levels to this that we're going to consider. The first level, or the first circle, is internal. It's about, am I allowing myself to be imperfect? Am I allowing myself to have good days and bad days without always freaking out about it, without striving for some kind of a constant state of perfection? For many of us, this can feel like a difficult tightrope to navigate because we live in a very performance-focused culture. And we have a lot of ideas about what it takes to be a high performer, what it takes to succeed. One of those ideas might include the kind of thing where you feel like every morning I should get up at 5 a.m. and then execute the perfect morning routine like a robot. And I should never have bad days. I should never have off days. I should always be going at maximum pitch towards my most audacious goal. With this kind of mindset, our humanness can feel like a flaw, and we might be very judgmental towards ourselves, first of all. Another way to say that is, if I'm constantly trying to control myself, and if I'm constantly trying to make myself conform to my own expectations, well, that is the first level of the problem. And we can address that, again, with some tools like introspective writing, perhaps, and practice allowing myself to be human, practice allowing myself to be imperfect, and learn that even if I have ambitious goals, even if I want to be a high performer, that doesn't mean I have to be non-stop in the zone. The second level, the second circle of this is to bring this outwards and allow other people to do their people things, allow other people to be flawed, allow for the fact that other people are going to have good days and bad days and ups and downs and so on, like myself. Of course, this is much easier to do once you've applied it for yourself. Like once you realize like, hey, yeah, this is just what it's like to be human, then you can also much more easily allow it in other people. And it also makes you take things less personally when you can just say, well, yeah, another person is going to have good days and bad days and ups and downs and moods and whatnot. It doesn't have to have anything to do with me. And then the third and trickiest circle is this. It's when you can allow other people to have their human ups and downs, even if they're projecting it at you. So even if someone is having a bad day and they're blaming you for it, even if someone is doing the whole story in their mind thing with you, where they're blaming you for their bad feelings, even though the bad feelings actually come from the stories in their minds, you can still say, yeah, that's also allowed. You're allowed to do that. That still doesn't have anything to do with me. And in fact, and this is what I've noticed, is that more and more I'm becoming a person who can hold this for other people. So even if you're upset with me, even if you're projecting something on me, I can hold that with compassion. I don't have to get emotionally triggered about that. I don't have to take it personally. And that is something that, especially in my work as a coach and as a facilitator, is extremely helpful. So as you can imagine, if you can do this, you become very hard to trigger. And it's the polar opposite of the thing that causes all this suffering, which is trying to control the emotional state of other people. So these are the 3 levels, and the way it worked for me is to go from the inside out. I did work to grow my own self-acceptance, grow self-compassion, and then worked my way out. One of the most specific ways in which you can practice this is doing a classic metta meditation, or a loving kindness meditation, where you're really doing this in your mind. You're practicing this kind of thing very specifically in your mind. I'll link to my favorite guided metta meditation in the description of this video. Try it out. It's a really beautiful practice. So these are the 3 things that, in my experience, are the 3 most effective things you can do if you want to become untriggerable. Do you have any other suggestions of what worked for you, or anything that gets you triggered all the time where you're not sure how to apply this, or anything else you'd like to learn more about? I'm currently making loads of videos, so drop your comments, drop your suggestions, and I'll probably get around to answering whatever questions you have.